So we're both really happy to be with you today to talk about building leadership capability, and we really thank you for giving up your valuable time. So it's a subject that's really close to both of our hearts and one we'd happily talk about all day, but we'll do our best to pack in as much as we can in the hour or so that we've got left with you today. So what can you expect? So today we're really hoping to provoke and challenge your thinking a bit about developing leadership capability, really help you make some smarter and more informed choices about the approaches you take. We're also going to share some research and evidence-based concepts that you can apply in your work. And as we go, we're also going to debunk some myths about leadership and leadership development as we go through. So we're going to be sharing a lot of stats in this presentation with you. We don't want you to have to worry about trying to capture them all as we go. So we've pulled together what we've called a leadership impact guide that collates them, curates them all into one place. So if you'd like a copy of that, then you just need to let us have your email address using that link on the screen. Just scan the QR code and it'll take you, and you can let us have your email address, and that impact guide will pop into your inbox really shortly. So just a little bit about our structure for today. So we're going to kick off with a section that talks about the state of leadership and the state of leadership development in our organisations. We're then going to talk about approaches you can take for identifying what leadership capabilities your organisation needs. We're going to unpack a little bit about what effective leadership development looks like in practice and some of the design choices you can make. And then we're going to give you an opportunity to think about what next for your organisation. And as we go, if you see the little signpost icon on the slides, that means we're signposting you to some resources you can follow up after the session to take your learning a little bit deeper. Great. So before we get started, just a little bit about us. So Garin and I, as he said, run Distinction Business Consulting. So we're an organisation development and design consultancy. So we work with HR, organisation development and leadership teams, focusing on leadership development, team excellence, organisation effectiveness, strategy and decision making. So I'm Dani. I've got experience across the private, public and not-for-profit sectors, both as a leader and senior leader, and I now work as an organisation development consultant. So our day-to-day work involves working with leaders and leadership teams on building tailored leadership capability enhancement and team integration. And that takes many forms, from facilitated sessions with leadership teams to leadership programs to coaching and much, much more. And that's across all sectors and industries. Garin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, great. So I've been an organisation development consultant for 18 years and have done a lot of extensive work internationally, working with lots of different types of organisations from different sectors, and working with leaders from the senior team all the way down to high potential frontline employees as well. And it's all about making transformative change in our organisations. We have a YouTube channel that has all the latest evidence-based sessions that we're running. We also do the OrgDev podcast. It's a regular podcast that goes out that interviews organisation development practitioners from across different sectors, from across really iconic institutions, and from across different countries as well. So we've got a new season that's coming up, and we've got people from the States, and we've got authors of very accomplished books as well.
Okay, so we said we start with the state of leadership, so let's go. We're going to delve into the current landscape of leadership and see what the research is telling us about the quality of leadership in our organisations. And we're also going to look at the challenges and opportunities that are really shaping the way that our leaders operate and how they evolve in our, immensely fast-paced and ever-changing organisations and the environments around them. So a few stats to get us started. First one is that just 14% of companies report having a strong bench of ready now leaders. So that's 14% of companies saying they've got the leaders they need that are up and running and now ready now. Less than half of leaders, just 42%, think their organisation's leadership is high quality. And only half of employees are actually confident in their own managers' abilities to lead their teams to be successful in the next 2 years. And leadership's getting harder. Some research said that 20% of managers, only 20% of managers feel equipped to manage their teams right now. So that's 80% of managers who don't feel they've got the resources or the confidence to do their jobs and manage their teams. 54% of managers are reported as suffering from work-induced stress and fatigue. And it's estimated that the average manager has 51% more responsibilities than they can effectively manage.
Yeah, and it's getting harder and harder. Obviously, that's what the research says, but Dani and I are sort of finding it anecdotally in the workplace as well. I'd be interested, if you're watching this on YouTube, to put your comments about what your findings are as well. We're finding that leaders are having more and more responsibility put onto them, but things aren't being taken away. And also, organizations are initiating more and more change initiatives and not finishing some off while piling more in as well. And that's contributing, isn't it, to that level of job manageability?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the whole hybrid and remote working things just added another layer of complexity to management and leadership roles. Okay, so where do we start? So leadership capability is a huge topic, and we're conscious that we've got a really mixed audience today in terms of experience, the size of organizations you're working in, where you are in your own journeys on kind of building leadership capability. So, we're going to try and cater for everybody today. So one way of looking at building leadership capability is thinking about kind of 6 interrelated elements that all need to be operating in harmony to really produce the best results. So first up is kind of recruiting and retaining the right people. So that's looking at both your existing leadership capability or those with the potential to become leaders. Are you recruiting the right people in to start with? And then retaining, are you creating an environment that really encourages the good leaders to stay in your organization? Next up's around professional development and training. So what do you need to be able to offer to the people in your organization, and what are you able to offer within your constraints? And then the last bunch of things is around performance management and motivation. So how can you support and motivate your leaders to really excel in their roles? So we've got limitations to the amount of time we've got with you today. So we've made a choice, and we're going to really focus on looking at the professional development and training aspects of building leadership capability. Okay, so as a dedicated HR or L&D manager, you already understand the pivotal role leadership plays in the success and growth of any organisation. It's why you've signed up to listen to us talk for an hour today. But some organisations and some of the decision makers in your organisations might still be hesitant about investing in leadership development. So what we're going to do now is we're going to give you a quick recap on some of the most powerful arguments to support the importance of investing in leadership development and those tangible benefits that come from effective leadership. And we're going to, you can then use this to help your stakeholders and decision makers make decisions.
And it's just HR understands the importance of leadership investment, doesn't it? But a lot of people actually in the organizations don't necessarily understand it as much. So we can't assume that people know. So we have to put forward a compelling business case, and we have to enter their language in terms of the impact that leadership investment actually creates, don't we?
Absolutely. So why does leadership matter? So when we look at that question, we look at it through 3 lenses. The first lens is around the impact of effective leaders on organization performance. So the research shows that organizations that do management and leadership well perform significantly better on high-level metrics like productivity, profitability, growth, and longevity. Organizations that invest in management and leadership development programs, there was some research last year that said on average they see a 23% increase in organization performance. They're 3 times more likely to exceed financial targets and 5 times more likely to adapt well to change. So when you look at the complexity of the world we're operating in, ability to adapt well to change is so important. And these differences persist over time. So it's not a kind of blip. Competent management and leadership really isn't easy to replicate. So it's something you can treat as a real competitive advantage and a real complement to your strategy. So the second lens that we look at the importance of leadership Okay, so the second lens that we look at why leadership matters is kind of the impact on individual performance and engagement. So it goes without saying really, but managers have a deep impact on the people they manage, including their motivation, their satisfaction, and the likelihood of leaving their job. So on a very practical level, skilled managers and leaders really know how to bring out the best in their people. Some recent Gartner research found that employees who report to effective managers are 15.4 times more likely to be high performers. So there's a real link between effective managers and individual performance. And the Chartered Management Institute did a report that found that there was a 32% increase in employee engagement and productivity from organisations who are investing in leadership development. So really important. And then effective leadership is also important for retention of kind of the people you need to keep. So half of those who say their bosses are ineffective are planning to quit their jobs within the next year.
Wow, that should ring a warning bell, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. And then the third lens that we look at the kind of importance of leadership through is the impact on well-being. Yes, so if your well-being strategy doesn't tackle management and leadership capability, then you're missing a huge trick and one of the kind of most important enablers of well-being in your organisation and your workplaces.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it?
So that's the case for good leaders and why it matters. And there's lots of evidence to support it, but we're really far from a position where we've cracked it and we really understand how to build leadership capability effectively in most of our organisations. So a recent report from Chartered Management Institute found that 82% of managers are what they term accidental managers. So an accidental manager is someone who's been promoted based on probably their technical competence, but given no formal management or leadership training to equip them for the role. And whilst age and education and experience can all contribute to helping people become more proficient in leadership and management, on their own, they're unlikely to create the conditions for full proficiency, and that's backed up by the research. And it's really too important to leave the chance. when you look at the research again, on average, there's a 10-year gap between people taking on leadership responsibilities and then undergoing any form of intensive leadership training or development. So there's 10 years where people are kind of effectively making it up as they go along and using best endeavours to be good leaders and managers.
And those bad habits are getting hardwired in, aren't they?
Absolutely, much harder to unwire those after 10 years. Okay. And then lastly, just 24%, less than a quarter of organisations feel their leadership development programmes are actually relevant or current. Okay. So of all the things as an HR or people function that we can do, developing our leaders is one of the things that has the biggest impact. It's the thing that has the biggest impact on growth. There was some research last year that correlated HR capabilities against business growth. And they found that the HR capability which has the biggest impact on business growth is actually leadership development. And by some way, it kind of outdid all of the other capabilities. If you're interested, second was change management and ability to communicate change well. Yet 75% of companies still approach leadership development as a perk or a benefit rather than kind of a truly strategic imperative. And only 35% of companies say they're actually focusing on building leadership capability. So clearly, leadership capability and development makes sense. The business case is clear, but there's something that getting in the way and something that's not working. So Garin, over to you.
Yeah, so Danny's laid out a really compelling case to actually invest in your leaders, and the fact that the outcomes are on an organization level, individual level, and a well-being level as well. So if there's such huge investment in leadership development, what gets in the way? Why isn't it as effective as it could be, or why are organizations not actually buying into the idea and seeing it as a perk rather than an essential component of organizational performance? Well, obviously, there's a lot of internal obstacles naturally in its way. So the first thing is the fact that it's competing against other initiatives. There's other equally well-deserving initiatives that require management attention and resource and time. And so you have to present that compelling case. The second thing is that leadership capability building is interlocked, or should be interlocked, with succession planning. It should be an essential part of your talent management architecture. Yet many organizations and many senior leaders see all this as kind of nice to have. It's what we do after we've completed all our business as usual activities, and people will see like notes in the diary to attend these kind of meetings, but they won't really do the planning and preparation and engagement to really get succession planning and make sure that we're working and it's foregrounded in our attention at all times. The third thing is that managers often perceive themselves as being time poor. So actually taking time away from actually doing the BAU or dealing with the crisis of the day or whatever it is, and moving in that reactive mode means that you don't necessarily have that time to tackle the sort of capacity building prevention space. But this is the stuff that actually creates time for you, so you're not always reacting. The fourth thing is that it's very easy to measure the expense of leadership capability investment, but it's more difficult to actually measure the outcomes and the impact of it. We live in a world where senior leaders want to see a return on investment, and you can do it. So we've used models like Kirkpatrick to actually measure the impact at different levels, all the way up to sort of on an organization basis. But it takes work and it takes time and it takes engagement for people actually to assess the impact of the training as well. So often it's sometimes seen as just too difficult. And then finally, many managers are reluctant to engage in development, and that'll be for a variety of reasons. So something that we do with our clients is we actually help them develop personas, so different types of managers in their organizations, and we can then start to understand, who are the managers that will always turn up to anything for development because they love it, and who are the more difficult, hard to reach ones. So these are sort of typical personas that we see. So the engaged learner, they get self-development, they're doing all the good things, they get the people thing, they'll go to it, they're brilliant. They go to everything, but will it have the biggest impact? Then you've got the overwhelmed achiever. They're the shoulders upon which the organization's success is built upon. And so they just can't get to that development. They're just such an essential component. They don't take time on themselves. They're in the domain of production rather than focusing on maintenance. And then you have the skeptical observer. They've seen it all. They've been there a number of years. They've seen fads come and go. They've seen the next big thing, and they need to be proven to that this leadership capability exercise is really going to move the dial, and it's worth them unlearning what they've invested in to help the organization to be a success and to learn these new ways as well. And then finally, you've got the reluctant participant. And sometimes they find it difficult to go into the leadership room because to learn and to develop yourself as a leader requires you to actually make yourself vulnerable and to show that you don't know. And so sometimes that might be that they feel a little bit insecure in their role, or they don't want to be amongst their peers and showing that they demonstrate they don't know everything. And so sometimes that makes them a reluctant participant, doesn't it, Dani?
Absolutely, yeah. We see that quite a lot. So it's really important to understand the personas of the people you're working with so you can tailor your approach.
Yeah, so you don't just have to mandate them into the room, because it makes learning much more difficult. It's also really important to bust some of these myths that Dani was talking about earlier. So one of the myths around leadership development is that or leadership capacity building, that it's just about the skills. There's a high failure rate in terms of managers being able to deliver on expectations. So some interesting research by DDI found that 50% of externally hired executives and 35% of internally promoted leaders fell short of the organization's performance expectations of them within the first 12 to 18 months. So capacity building is a long game, or a medium to long game. So we have to, it takes time to build that ability. So what it often means, if we're not doing it, it takes time to get them actually to be fully contributing. And it also means that their teams don't have the leadership they require. So one of the ways in which you can focus, and it's not just about the skills, is job manageability. Obviously, Dani was saying there that it's around 50% of managers find their jobs unmanageable. So if you can help managers tame their job and help it make it more manageable, then it actually is 5 times more efficient than skill proficiency in improving their effectiveness. So focusing on job manageability first before we tackle the skills can make an exponential difference. In fact, skill proficiency actually only contributes a 4% increase in manager effectiveness, while job manageability actually creates a 21% increase in management effectiveness. So the case for focusing on that is huge, but it often doesn't get the attention it deserves. So you need to set your leaders up to succeed. So these are a number of things that we actually do consistently with leaders to help them. So one of those things is often managers go into role really quickly. We don't take the time to really set out the expectations of the organization, set out the expectations of their direct reports, and really importantly, the expectations of their line manager as well. And if we don't have those things clear, then we really don't know. We haven't defined what good performance looks like. So by actually resetting role expectations, what it does is it actually makes it 1.4 times more likely that the manager will find their job manageable. Another thing, we talked about the fact that managers don't get development for up to 10 years before they get started. So management and leadership doesn't have to be complicated. It's about doing the right things every day consistently. So it's about embedding the good, healthy habits, time for planning, time for strategizing, time for spending with your team one-to-one, all those good, simple things that we do. So if we make sure that those habits are embedded, then habit and routine building actually improves job manageability by a huge 71%. So it's really worthwhile doing. And then finally, for HR people that are watching today's video, there's a lot of things that can be done to actually reduce the friction that comes with management. So managers are extremely busy. We've already said that they're overloaded, but there's a lot of internal hurdles around process, how quickly it is to actually go through the recruitment process, to get sign off, to actually do first, second interviews, to tackle the appraisal process, all that kind of stuff. These are things that HR can do. And what that does is that actually increases 1.4 times more likely that the managers will find their jobs manageable when their tasks are simplified or automated. So just to reiterate what Dani was saying earlier, so we've shared a lot of stats with you. So we're just pausing just to remind you that you can access all the stats that we've shared with you in this video with references and with additional information if you basically scan this QR code or go to that link, and then just basically you can download the report and you can use it for when you're presenting your compelling business case to your managers to get investment.
Brilliant. Thank you, Garin. So before we go any further, we're going to address some important points about terminology. So leadership's an extremely popular and widely studied concept, and we know it's a fundamental ingredient in our organization's success. If you Google the words leader and leadership, there's over 500 million results. Baffling. But when you look at the research, there's just no consensus in the research about what leadership actually is. And if you start then trying to unpack how leadership differs from management, that's also widely debated. And there's no kind of one definitive answer, and there's inevitable overlap between the two. You hear some people being very definitive about what they are, but that's, that's not backed up by the research. So what really matters is that your organisation and your managers and your leaders and the people that are being managed in your teams know what you mean by those terms, and they understand the expectations that go with those terms. So we really encourage you, don't assume it's clear. It's really going to vary organisation to organisation. You know, we work with a lot of organisations in very similar sectors or very similar organisations. The difference between what they expect of a leader or a manager in one is very different to another. So without those clear definitions for people about what those mean for your organisation, you're essentially setting people up to fail. Another aspect of definition matters is, you know, when we start talking about leadership capability and development, it can be a bit like navigating this maze of jargon. So you'll hear mention of capabilities and competencies and leadership styles and leadership skills and leadership behaviours, and the list goes on and on. It can end up feeling quite overwhelming. You know, if you take just one of those things on the screen, so leadership styles, for example, there's some work being done at the Oxford Review at the moment by a brilliant academic, David Wilkinson, and he's been reviewing all of the academic literature to really try and capture a list of all the different leadership styles. And his list is up to 160 different leadership styles talked about in the academic literature at the moment. And that was just his last count. I think, you know, every time he turns over a new paper, there's a new one added to the list. So, you know, there's 160 different leadership styles, all claiming to be the thing that's going to be the answer to your leadership capability. So inevitably there's significant overlap between those styles, and some are almost completely indistinguishable from another. So it's really worth taking some time to kind of think about the different elements on the screen, unpack what they mean for your organization, and what level you're kind of targeting your leadership capability efforts at.
Yeah, and I think it's important to sort of remember that not one of those things on their own are a silver bullet. So
No.
many organizations, you'll actually find like competency frameworks that have had enormous investment in time and a big launch. And it's like, this is the thing that's going to fix everything in the organization. And yet this kind of unloved thing that just doesn't get touched. And the same goes for behavior frameworks as well, isn't it? It's what's meaningful and matters to your organization, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. And if you want to simplify it, then in summary, it's going to probably come down to three things. It's going to be what your leaders do, how they do it, and why they do it. So if you can kind of use that as your framework to think about your leadership development plans, then that can be really valuable. So we obviously don't have time to do a deep dive on kind of this whole arena today, but what we're going to do now is share 4 evidence-based resources for you that you can kind of start to draw on to get you started. So the first thing we're going to share is a recent review of kind of Western world academic literature, which was carried out last year. It was published in the European Journal of Training and Development, and that looked at the academic literature and synthesized a list of 18 key leadership competencies that are needed for the 21st century. So it's a really interesting kind of paper to look at and just understand kind of what all of those things mean. So if you'd like access to that paper, then details, you can scan the QR code on the screen, and that'll take you there. But I'm also happy for you to contact me directly if you want more information. I've got a summary paper that might be useful if you want access to that. The second resource we're going to share is something called the Leadership Code, which takes a more outcomes-based angle to this, and it's written by Dave Ulrich and his colleagues at RBL. So they wrote a book on this a number of years back, but his organisation RBL are constantly updating their data and their thinking and refining the model. So that's well worth taking a look at. And that really shifts the thinking from the attributes of a good leader, as per the last slide, to the outcomes they need to achieve. So it starts with that understanding of what leaders are trying to accomplish in terms of their results, either inside or outside your organisation, and then what it takes to do that. So they look at it through 5 lenses. So the first is human capital developer. So that's looking at the next generation talent and how you develop that. Talent manager, which is kind of leveraging what your existing people are doing and helping them be really confident. Strategizing, obviously planning, and execution, that's really delivering on what they need to as leaders. And then they put personal proficiency at the center of their model as well. There's lots more detail underneath it, and it really breaks down what leadership looks like and what leadership looks like across different levels. So that's worth kind of digging into. The third resource we're going to share with you, and it's one you might be familiar with because it got quite a lot of press, is Project Oxygen from Google. So that was launched back in 2008, and Project Oxygen was Google's quest to really determine what it means to be a great leader at their company. So this research not only identified key behaviours of their best managers, but also looked at the impact that these behaviours have on team performance and overall organisational success. So Project Oxygen identified several critical managerial qualities, things like being a good coach or empowering your teams, kind of not micromanaging, showing a real genuine interest in team members' success and well-being. And all of those things added up really contribute to great teams. So they really underline the importance of kind of emotional intelligence, communication skills, and a really supportive approach in leadership.
And that was a
So
big data set over a long period of
massive
time,
data
wasn't it?
set, yeah. So it's really interesting research to dig into, and I think it still stands true today. Okay, so we're going to hand over to Garin for our fourth resource, which is the leadership pipeline.
Yeah, so this is just a really good way of making sense of when we're starting to think about the capabilities we need to develop in our organization, that you'll be they'll have macro capabilities that everyone in the organization needs, but we also need to sort of set specific capabilities for certain parts of the organization. So it could be that there's certain divisions that you're going to invest in quite a lot. But a really useful model, and there are other models that have been developed since, but this is just a useful kind of heuristic to look at it, is Ram model of the leadership pipeline. So if we think about a leader's journey as they develop through an organization, this can be really useful. So we kind of start life as an individual contributor, simpler times when we're just responsible for our own outputs, our own problems, our own workload, and we work well, we deliver on expectations, and people appreciate what we do. So that's recognized. So we're then promoted to managing others. So this is an important point in anyone's managerial journey, where they still have their own workload, but they're starting to actually be responsible for other people's output too. So they're starting to deliver tasks through others. And so what happens is this is quite a big mindset shift. So the way in which you create value for the organization actually becomes more sophisticated. So not only just what your outputs are, but actually being able to manage the needs and the career, the pastoral issues, whatever it is around your people as well. And so you need a particular kind of skill set where you're starting to use things like delegation and coaching and questioning skills as well. If we do a fairly good job at that, or if our organization just grows anyway, then we then take our next turn, and then we're then promoted to leading a team. So again, now we're responsible for an actual entity, a group of people and individuals that we need to coordinate and make sure that they're collaborating, make sure that it's a cohesive team as well. And again, the way in which you develop value, because your workload hopefully becomes less and less, although some organizations still insist that all managers still have their own workload as well. So at this point, again, your skills are getting more sophisticated, you're getting further away from the task, and the way in which you create value actually changes. So it's not directly, sort of doing your own work is actually creating the most value. It might be actually removing obstacles or liaising more effectively with other teams that are either upstream or downstream from you as well. Again, if we're doing well with our career, we may then get promoted to leading a function. So again, with all the responsibilities of a team and more teams, but we also then start to potentially being part of a leadership team as well. So this is like a more enterprise level, where we're starting to have to really have two identities, team one and team two. And therefore, how do we actually make sure that we have something what we call enterprise awareness, where we actually start to think about the needs of the organization in balance with the needs of our function. So sometimes that means actually prioritizing the needs of organization above actually our function actually delivering on its objectives. And it's very difficult to develop those skills when you just have spent all your career in one function. And that's why it's really useful to have spent time in other teams, so you can empathize and understand what's happening upstream, downstream, and all across as well. And then finally, leading the organization. So again, a much more nuanced, sophisticated set of skills. You're so far away from the task by now. How you affect change is very different. It will be through your communication, through your engagement with others. It will be through your strategic planning and setting, and how you are participative in your decision making as well. So you can start to see that all different capabilities at all those particular levels. When leading organization, you're really thinking about the organization's culture, and you're quite symbolic in terms of what you do as well.
Brilliant. And I think nobody's saying that all of our career paths are linear and you kind of
Oh
move neatly
gosh,
from one
no.
to the other to the other to the other.
No.
Career paths are much squigglier and wigglier than that, but it's a really
Yeah.
useful kind of framework for thinking about what's expected and needed of leaders at different levels.
And for a variety of reasons, leaders might skip some of these steps
Yeah.
but still be applying the individual contributor approach, or still applying and that's often when you start to get like a concertina organization, where you're not giving the person below you enough space to do their work in the right way.
Yeah.
So again, that capability building can really help address that. It's about making sure your leaders are all in the right place doing the right thing.
Yeah, and you find that particularly, don't you, in fast, high growth organizations, people move from individual contributor to leading a function in the blink of an eye, because the organization's just grown so quickly.
All boats rise in a tide, don't
Yeah,
they?
indeed. Okay.
So let's think about, we've kind of sort of set the case We've looked about definition. So how do you actually identify and align around the leadership capabilities that your organization needs to develop in order to achieve your organization's objectives? So what we're going to do is we're going to share some things where you need to focus your attention on. And it means that you're just not reaching for the usual suspects and just going for a leadership development program that just does the basics. This is really thinking about what does our organization actually need to achieve where it's going. So the first place to start is to examine the vision. So this is what we aim to become, and the mission, why we're doing, and the purpose of it, and also really importantly our values as an organization. Unfortunately, too many organizations have values that may be out of date, or they're not the real values of the organization. Your values should be the things that are required to actually achieve your strategy of the day. So it's making sure that these values are fresh, they're relevant, and that because your managers are going to play a key role in embedding those values into the behaviors of your employees, and they have to role model it as well. So you've got to have real clarity, and therefore the capabilities have to be designed from there. And the next place to really focus that is essential is looking at the strategic objectives and the strategy. So the strategic objectives will tell you what is the level of ambition of the organization? Like, how fast growth are we going for here? What is the pace we're going to set? What is the stretch between where we are now and where we want to be in the future? And the strategy will often sort of talk about, how we're going to do it as well. Now, unfortunately, when you do examine strategies, and Danny and I have had expensive time in the strategy room, and it's an imperfect process, isn't it, Danny?
Absolutely, yeah.
So sometimes the strategic document may be a little bit vague or a little bit ambiguous, or not really paint like how we're going to achieve it. It might just end up being a wish list. So it's really important to have the courage and the confidence to go back to your senior leaders and help them articulate what is the role of leaders in achieving this strategy. What is their role? What are our expectations of them? What do they need to develop? Where do they need to focus their attention? What are the essential things they need to do? So often those things will be missing. So it's really important when we do it that we facilitate that conversation. And it can be intensely useful for the senior leaders to go through that process with you, because it's them actually thinking about it and actually taking a much more realistic and pragmatic approach to the strategy, and really then assessing where their leaders are now and what's the gap we've got to bridge, and how do we sequence that? How do we build backwards from the objective that we're getting to, and where do we start now in sequence? Another place to look is something called the target operating model. Some organizations have it, many don't, but this is basically the interplay of how people, technology, and processes come together within your organization to actually achieve the organization's objectives. So it's a really essential bit. So if you're starting to see that, we're making a big bet on technology, so we've currently got old legacy systems and we're going to be implementing new technology and using that much used overused term digital transformation, then you know that you need to develop change capability in your people. You need to develop communication, you need to develop engagement, you need to really start to get them to appreciate participative decision making, to engage people in that process and that journey as well. Another place to focus is the organization design. So the design really matters, the form of your organization. So for example, if you're a matrix organization, then you're going to need more sophisticated managers, because often direct reports will have 2-line managers. So you have to have a sophisticated line manager who is communicative with the fellow line manager to make sure that they're coordinated and aligned as well. And if you have a functional setup, so functional setups create efficiencies, but what they also do as well is they create silos. So it's really important that leaders play an absolutely key role in boundary spanning between the different functions to make sure that they're aligned and they're planning together and they're not sort of varying apart. Then it's really important to focus on the needs of employees. So your employee value proposition is your promise to your employees. This is our promise to you to attract, retain, and develop you as well. So therefore, your leaders are absolutely the key enabler of fulfilling that promise with your employees. So for example, if we look at career, so if your employee value proposition is we develop our people, then your capabilities absolutely have to reflect that. You have to develop that capability in your leaders to make time for career development, to be spending time thinking about the development of their people, to be engaging them in conversations, to be looking for opportunities, to be engaging in the internal marketplace of opportunities as well, and making sure that when the opportunities come for progression, that their people are ready. Unfortunately, many organizations, the focus is on task. So that capability really focuses on that, doesn't it, Dani?
It does. There's nothing worse than the employee value proposition that's out there, and you've sold it really heavily, and then the reality doesn't live up to that at all. There's nothing going to kind of disengage and demotivate people quicker than that break in that promise.
Yeah, if you can't do it,
made.
just tear it up. Just better not
Yeah,
to have it. Don't make the promise if you're not going to fulfill it.
absolutely.
Then the other thing as well is, and this is a step that many organizations forget, is they actually forget to actually ask their employees, what do we want from our managers? So if you ask questions like, what qualities and skills do you value in a manager, you can get really key data. So rather than guessing what we think of employees need, they will tell you. So some interesting research that the Government and People Group found, they asked their employees, and they found that 66% of employees want communication, 59% want prioritization of well-being, and 55% want clarity on objectives. So they've just told you this is what we need from our managers to get exceptional performance from us and for us to stay with you and give you our discretionary effort. So that gives you a huge jumping off point. But again, we don't ask the question, do we? Okay, sorry, it's just we see this so much. It's just we just really want to make sure if you take these things away with you today when you think about capability in your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now we're going to talk a bit about effective approaches to leadership development. So it's all very well working out what leadership capabilities and attributes you need, but researchers also expose this knowing doing gap when it comes to leadership development. So this persistent rift where conventional development falls short and fails to spark a real true behavioural transformation in our leaders in the workplace. So developing leaders' knowledge and skills doesn't always result in significant change or transfer of learning. And some of the stats we shared earlier back up this problem. And it's a concern that Gartner found echoed by HR leaders last year when they did some research with them, with only 23% believing that their managerial training investments actually deliver. So we proposed two things to bridge that gap. First up is what we call the leadership ecosystem. So these are the factors to do with the wider organisation, team and environment that your leaders find themselves in that impact their ability to be effective leaders and managers. So your leaders aren't operating in a vacuum. There's an embracing a whole systems approach to leadership development is one of the things that can really help bridge the knowing doing gap. So it involves stepping beyond the traditional skill and knowledge sessions or even things like coaching to really build leadership capability. It's about taking a step back and really considering whether our organisations are conducive to supporting leadership growth. So do our leaders have a real opportunity to apply new knowledge, skills and behaviours in their day-to-day working environments? So Garin spoke earlier about the importance of workload manageability in that kind of area and how it can have more of an influence on leadership effectiveness than new skills do. But there's a whole other ecosystem of things to consider too. So, one of the things we talk about is expectations of managers. So are expectations of your leaders and managers really clear? It's hard to be effective in that role if it's not clear. So it's really important to define what being a manager means in your specific organizational context and team context, as understanding can really vary wildly. And also to enhance your onboarding processes to ensure that new managers really thoroughly grasp their role and their responsibilities and what management means in your context. Next up is culture. So does your culture mean your leaders feel confident in applying any new skills and knowledge without fear of negative consequences? Do they feel safe trying new ways of leading and managing and trying out new approaches and learning from the mistakes? So have you got a safe organisational climate? And then we talked a bit earlier about systems and processes. So are your broader organisation systems and processes, are they supporting and encouraging the behavioural changes that you want to see in your manager? Okay, so another area of the leadership ecosystem that probably doesn't get talked about enough is senior leader support and buy-in. So are your senior leaders being supportive and are they really bought into your leadership capability building efforts? And this is really important on two fronts. So first up, they've got a role as line manager of the people being developed. So are they then providing effective support to those going through leadership development? This might be about integrating management development activities into personal development plans. It might be setting specific objectives relating to leadership capability for the direct reports. It might be engaging in regular discussions to track progress that their leaders are going through with a development activity. And that sort of support could also involve providing feedback on any changes they're seeing when people are trying new leadership approaches or new leadership behaviours. If they can provide feedback, then that really helps boost motivation and can really help transfer learning into practical application. The other area of senior leader support is something that doesn't happen as often as it ought to, and that's getting your senior leaders actively involved in shaping your leadership development curriculum. So whilst senior leaders will often be the people who green light the idea of management development, or they might sign off on a budget, their deeper involvement in shaping these is often less frequent, but can be really incredibly impactful. So if you can get your senior leaders involved in really shaping what type of activities you're going to be involved in leadership building capability, that can really make sure your leadership development efforts are really aligned with business goals, and that can really overall enhance your overall performance of your
Yeah, and
programs.
it's really important as well, because you also have to be quite explicit and spell it out to the senior leaders. There's a kind of an expectation that senior leaders know how to sponsor a program, don't they? But there's a big variance in quality and commitment to doing it as well. So be really clear what you need from them and ensure that they know up front what the time commitment's going to be as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So all of these things, and all of these things combined and others, will make it more likely your leadership capability aspirations turn into reality. So that's part of one of bridging that knowing doing gap, the leadership ecosystem. So the other part of the bridge that we talk about is kind of in moving from knowing to doing is what's known as transformative learning. So that's science of the aha, got it.
So
That
important, isn't
moment.
it? Aha, the penny drops.
Got it. So simply sending someone on a training course isn't enough. It's why so many organisations invest in digital learning platforms, and they buy huge libraries of online courses or invest huge amounts of effort and resource in building their own courses, and then they find out that take-up's poor, or when people do go through it, the impact's limited. It's also why organisations roll out a leadership development initiative and then another one and then another one, and the hope is always the next one's going to be the silver bullet that really fixes our leadership capability issue. But in reality, leadership capability development is not that straightforward. It's not just about giving people new knowledge or new skills or even experience. Real transformative leadership development is about something deeper. It's a transformation in how someone thinks or feels or makes sense to themselves and their role as a leader. So it's about how can you support them to make a shift in how they view the world, and then really open up new choices and avenues for them about how they lead, what they do, and how they go about doing that, and then help put that into action. When we're creating or commissioning programs or work for leadership capability, we really need to expand our focus. So rather than simply kind of expanding a list of skills or credentials your leaders have got, it's about how can you make the learning transformative. One of the models we particularly like is Jack Mesereau's 10 Steps of Transformative Learning. So he's a professor at Columbia University. And this is a really lovely framework that outlines the process that individuals go through when they're kind of undergoing a fundamental change in perspective about how they lead. So it's a really useful lens to use when you're commissioning leadership development work. So these steps describe how learners kind of critically examine their own beliefs, leading to a more kind of open and reflective and emotionally mature understanding of themselves and the world and how they lead. We're not going to go through that in detail now, but if you scan the QR code on the screen now, there's a link so you can read more about it and kind of look at how that might work for you. But what we will leave you with on transformative learning is kind of some quick steps to think about. So review your approach to leadership, building leadership capability. Is it enabling transformative learning? So does it encourage deep self-examination? So have you got structured opportunities in your approach for leaders to really critically assess themselves and their personal connection to their roles as leaders and their responsibilities as leaders? Does it encourage challenging of assumptions and beliefs? So is there space and opportunity for leaders to really actively engage in reflective thinking, real challenge what they think, reevaluate their long-standing beliefs and assumptions in order to move forward? Are there practical and stretching action plans included? So are there opportunities to explore new approaches, and are your leaders being guided in how they can kind of turn those approaches and develop real actionable steps to kind of apply new perspectives within their leadership practice? The next one's about acquiring and implementing new habits, skills, and knowledge. So they might know what they want to do, but then you are going to have to give them or find a way of supporting them to develop the new skills and knowledge that they need to really successfully implement those approaches in practice. And lastly, it's what we call kind of accountability of application. So have you got a system or support process in place that encourages leaders to take ownership of their learning journey, making sure they feel accountable for applying and integrating those new skills and insights into their daily leadership practice?
Yeah, and that's such an important part of it, isn't it? That's part of the learning transfer, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But that accountability is so important. Otherwise, people have a great experience and they find it really insightful, but then they just get drawn back into the status quo again, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So before we wrap up the transformative learning piece, we just wanted to share a few ideas at a more granular level that are great levers for supporting transformative learning. So there's 12 on this slide, which you can look at afterwards. We're only going to pick out 4, some of our favourites, but really happy to talk to you outside of the session if you'd like to about what the others might look like. So first up, we've got discussion and dialogue. So we say, never underestimate the power of rich dialogue that, for your leaders with other leaders. So some of the most powerful learning we see comes from that discussion and that dialogue and talking through how they approach things, experience they've had in the past. So really creating that space for leaders to step back from the day-to-day, reflect and talk together, and that can be really transformative. So over to you, Garin, for the next one.
Yeah, so the next one is to bring the system into the room. So it's really important to make it pragmatic and practical and relevant for the sessions that you run. So just to give you an example, so one example that we use to bring the system into the room. So we'll often sort of help leadership capability development sort of relate to the strategy of the organization. So we'll actually bring the authors of the strategy into the room and encourage them to have a chance to discuss amongst themselves, to go into small pairs and think about, from reading the strategy, what stands out for them, what their gaps are, what their questions might be. And then you then have a dialogue with the authors, and that kind of interaction can help to really sort of clarify things. It can be a really great source of feedback from the authors of the strategy, like in terms of what's worked, what's not worked, what they need to do better to engage, how to involve managers in the design of the strategy moving forwards as well. And also it gives the actual managers in the room an opportunity to feel a sense of agency and a chance that they can actually interpret the strategy and make sense of it without kind of feeling stupid for asking the dumb questions as well. And often we'll bring like the CEO in or the CCO in, whoever's actually contributed to that strategy. And it's a really useful process, isn't it, Dani?
Yeah, I think both for the leaders and the CEO or whoever's been brought in, really two-way. Next up, a firm favourite for us is expectations meetings. We can never talk
all the
about
time,
expectations all
every
the time.
day.
Expectation setting you can never do enough of it. So this can be really powerful for transformative learning. So we'll often get leaders to go away and have an expectation setting meeting with their own manager or their own leader. And even if somebody's worked with a leader for a long time, these expectation meetings are always transformative and they always learn something new. So we'll give them some guided questions to support the expectations meeting. It might be about kind of what are the expectations in terms of deliverables, success measures, but also about how they're going to communicate together, and working styles and working preferences, all really, really important things to have open and transparent expectation setting conversations about.
Yeah, and it's so important to do those things when the sun is shining rather than when they're in conflict as well. And even if you're an experienced person that's been in post, your expectations of you will shift and evolve over time. So the organization and your manager's expectations of you in year 1 will be very different from expectations in year 3. But we don't have those types of conversations. So we just operate under lots of assumptions, don't we?
We do, absolutely. Okay. And then the last one we'll talk about now is retrospectives.
Yeah, so retrospectives are a really important element of transformative learning. So a lot of managers are future focused, what next, and planning and responding to what's happening in the moment. What retrospectives do, and this kind of is borrowed from the world of Agile, it's just a really good tool that can take 30 to 40 minutes when done well, and you follow a structure like keep, start, stop, or liked, learned, loved, longed for. Is that right? That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity to take a critical incident or to evaluate a relationship between two teams or whatever. And so through a retrospective, you get to understand what the learnings are. And so why something didn't work or how something can be improved. But what's really important as well is that you start to understand your contribution to it. We often and particularly with managers, we live in the world of them and us, where we might be prone to blaming. And a retrospective is a really good opportunity to take responsibility for your part in either improving something or contributing to a challenge that's existing. And that is a really big moment, isn't it? Because sometimes managers need a little bit of encouragement to be reflective.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so easy not to do that when you're kind of caught up in the busyness of day to day.
Or it can be a little bit painful, can't it?
It can be painful too.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there's loads of other levers that you can use, and we'll let you look at the slide afterwards. Okay. So we're going to shift now to think about some of the design choices in front of you when you're thinking about building leadership capability. And first up, we're going to talk about delivery options. So there's a whole host of modes you can use for building leadership capability. And very often organizations, when they think about leadership capability, automatically go to a leadership program in some guise. They might also look at online courses or academic qualifications, and one-to-one coaching is becoming increasingly popular. And done well, they've all got the potential to really help build leadership capability, especially if they're grounded in a transformative learning approach. But it can take a lot of effort to get something up and running like a formal leadership program. You know, if you've got to get 10, 12 leaders in the same place, in a room on the same day, that can be a challenge in itself.
A lot of things have to be right to get that many people in the room.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's lots of other options. So those are really good, solid options, and they can be really effective. But there's some other things that you can think about, and we're going to just share some of those and just be a bit creative and challenge some of your traditional assumptions about what leadership capability building looks like. So Garin, do you want to talk about these?
Yeah, so and what's good is that leadership capacity building doesn't have to be expensive. The four things in the middle do have an expense item to them. The other things can actually happen sort of relatively inexpensively. So one of the things that we like to do is we like to have facilitated sessions with leadership teams. So we actually work with leaders in context. So they will either be working through a decision or through a challenge or having a normal standing meeting that they would have. And we would actually work with them through that process to help optimize it, and everyone taking individual responsibility for making sure that it works well. And that would be like the preparation for the meeting, because often is the biggest predeterminant in the success of the meeting itself. What actually happens in, how do we engage, how do we lean into the difficult conversations that we need to have, what happens when things get difficult, what happens when we've got contrasting perspectives, all that kind of thing is so important. And you can't necessarily work on those things in an abstract way. It's when you're in the process of doing. And then what happens afterwards? How do you make sure that things get implemented too? So those kind of things can be really effective. Learning in the flow of work is also really effective when it's done in a structured way. So it's not just throwing someone in at the deep end, which is often the talent development method for some organizations. It's about giving a structured learning experience. So it's almost like a 15% stretch. And so the person's manager has a role in helping that person reflect, delegate well, set authority, set boundaries, and reflect with them in terms of what went well, helping them build confidence and what they can do better next time, and giving them more and more responsibility as well. So it kind of looks a little bit like the 70-20-10 model, but it's really working with that manager to support them through the process.
Yeah, and that could be one of those challenges with 70-20-10 model, the quality of the support that individuals get when they're doing kind of learning in the flow of work. If they haven't got the support around them to learn well, then that can be really challenging to make that effective.
Yeah, it can be risky.
So some other things you might want to think about are things like job shadowing, building communities of practice where you bring your leaders together to kind of network of peer support. That can be really powerful. There's kind of apps that are kind of app-based challenges, which can be really interesting, kind of gamify leadership capability building. So some of those apps can be really great for prompting thinking and reflection and building a community around kind of key leadership topics. You can support that with kind of videos and mini tasks and activities for people. And then volunteering. So getting people to volunteer or get involved in volunteering can be a really transformative learning experience. So we often recommend people look at school volunteering as a school governor or as a non-exec director for charities of various sizes. They're always looking out for people willing to volunteer in that way, and that can give people a new perspective on leadership from a different angle.
Yeah, just sitting in the seat of what it's like to be on the board, working with managers can be really a cathartic breakthrough moment, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then some other things there that you'll be familiar with, the idea of secondments within your organization, but also outside your organization to another organization in your industry, mentoring and also reverse mentoring, where kind of more junior staff mentor experienced staff. That can create some really interesting learning. And then things like job rotation and real world projects are all valuable.
And what they require, though, is they do require you to do the work with senior leadership buy-in as well, because things like job rotation, sometimes when leaders aren't bought into it, they may do something like talent hoarding, which is like, I'm going to hold on to my people. I do not want to give them aspiration to move on because I like them where they are now. It'll be a long time to develop them. But if we get them to understand the value to the organization for the capacity building for the strategy, then it presents a much more compelling case for them to allow their people to develop that enterprise awareness and see what happens upstream and downstream from them.
Yeah, and the impact on kind of breaking down silos can be really
Oh,
immense when you've got
huge.
people just moving from one team to another and really understanding the world from
No more them
there.
and us.
No more them and us. It's all them. It's all us. So we're going to look now about who to invest in.
Great. So there's different groups we can invest in. Again, it's about getting the right blend for your organization. So naturally, most budgets go to the first group, which is like the high potentials. They're kind of sort of seen as our future significant contributors. They may be exclusive, so no one knows who they are, or it might be inclusive, where everyone kind of knows who's on the list as well. So it has pros and cons. The research actually looking at the next group, which is like the underperformers, the ones that aren't quite performing to expectation. The research shows that actually investment in them produces the biggest change in performance, doesn't it, Danny?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely.
But obviously, if you have high potentials, then their actual contribution is greater than an underperformer, according to the research as well. So it's about getting the investment right. But high potentials will often improve anyway. So you need
Yes.
to make just challenge your assumptions that the money should just go to them anyway. Another group is aspiring leaders. So we talked about the fact that it takes 12 to 18 months before someone's performing at the right level. So if you focus on developing your aspiring leaders, that your bench is ready when the moment comes. And if your organization is growing and you need that next cohort of managers ready, then it's really worthwhile investing in those aspiring leaders.
It can also be a great motivation tool for people to
Mm.
feel they're being given that investment for the
Yeah,
future.
it can actually boost motivation, can't it, and
It can.
retention.
Absolutely.
Senior leaders is often a worthwhile. I talked about a more sophisticated and nuanced skill set, but often, sometimes a phenomenon we often see is that the investment goes into middle managers, so they get a really good management program, but the senior leaders get left out. And if they've missed out on development on the basics like coaching and delegation, their impact of not having that skill is amplified out throughout the organization. The impact is much greater. So it's making sure we haven't missed the basics with the senior leaders. Often they'll get coaching, which is more discreet, and that coaching will then focus on it. But there are more cost-effective ways of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you want them to act as good role models for
They have to be
management
all
and
of them.
leadership in your organization.
Yeah, really good point. And then, do you invest in all of your leaders as well? Are you completely inclusive? Obviously, a lot of these things about where is based on how much budget you have, how much time you have, the track record of previous initiatives. And it's really important to sequence the activities and build this into your capacity building plan as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing to say, it's not just about us as learning and development people or organization development people, delivering transformative learning experiences for our leaders and our aspiring leaders. There's something about them taking responsibility for their learning. So the most effective leaders are those who manage to make that shift in a mindset to become really reflective leaders and who take responsibility for their own learning. So leaders who really reflect and then adapt their approach continually are much more likely to be successful. So there's a role for us, as well as providing opportunities for our leaders, is really to support them to prioritize time for reflection and learning, as well as doing the day job and taking action and task delivery. So have that as a thing that you need to cultivate and foster in your
Yeah, because we
organization.
live in such an action biased, action orientated world, don't we? It's always like the go, 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 but the reflection is where the real change happens, isn't
Yeah.
it?
So we're going to wrap up now with some top tips for your leadership program. We say leadership program, but these, you can apply these to all sorts of leadership development approaches as well. So first up, Garin.
Okay, so sequencing really matters. So we often advocate that focus on the mindset first, then the skills. So, because if you just give people the skills with their old mindset, where they may be operating at a level below where they should be, then you'll just get more of the same. Whereas if you do the work on the mindset and then give them the skills, then you get exponential impact.
Brilliant. Okay, so number 2 is around staggered learning. So breaking down the learning process into manageable chunks over a period of time to be much more effective. So rather than overwhelming individuals with, 3 or 4 days in one go, overwhelm information, breaking it down can help people take on board the information, think about how they're going to apply it, put it into practice, and then come back for some more. So that could be really powerful.
Absolutely. It's really important to fit around the business rhythm. So if you're going to give them input or an opportunity to develop a new skill or an emphasis on something, if you fit it around when things fall within the year. So if you want them to develop the strategic planning, do it during or just before the strategic planning process. If you want people to develop their coaching skills or career development skills, then do it around the end of year when people are starting to do their appraisals, if that's the system that you go with as well. And also be really respectful of the business rhythms of departments as well. So, if you're going to invite your finance team in, don't do it at year end. Like, they may be there in body, but they won't be there in mind. So we have to be respectful to make sure that people are present as well. And also, I guess this is not quite part of this, but like, if people are working hybrid, then respect those working patterns as well. That's really important.
Absolutely. So number 4 is around regularly updating and kind of giving people top-up sessions to help ensure that any skills and knowledge are not only understood but also remembered and applied over time. So you can also use top-up sessions to kind of help people adapt their learning to changes that are happening in their business and their environment. So that's a powerful step.
Absolutely. And adapt to the audience. So meet leaders where they are. Very rarely does a leader sit down on a Monday morning and go, right, I shall now embark on delegation this morning. They don't think like that. So don't frame it up like that. Think about how they approach the world. And that is often through real life problems, tasks, or dilemmas they're trying to work through. So frame it up in that particular way. And then they'll be able to make the connection between what you're giving them and how they can relate it to their own practice, rather than it being abstract and too theoretical.
And our 6th evidence-based tip is giving people a sense of agency and responsibility. So when we're designing leadership approaches, it's really crucial to give leaders a sense of involvement and responsibility control, so it doesn't feel like it's being something being done to them, but rather being done with them. So that can really foster greater engagement and effectiveness. So when we work with organisations, we will involve leaders in the design of the programme through focus groups or research calls. And I think it's also really helpful to help leaders think before they come to a program or an intervention, how they're going to make space to integrate that learning into their day-to-day work ahead of time. And then once it's up and running, get their feedback, see how they're finding it, and really act on that and show you're acting on that so that they can see their input matters and is valued.
Yeah, and that really matters because it's how they turn up. Like if they turn up going, well, this is being done to me, like you guys are going to have to do jazz hands towards me to entertain me, to get me to engage and overcome my skeptical mind, then you're wasting time. They need to go in the room ready, focused, and knowing that this is going to help them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then finally, number 7 is just creating a space for them. Slow things down in order to speed up. They need to have the space to work things through in their own mind, to discuss things and really think about what it is that's really important to them and what they need to change. So it's okay, get them off site, away from disturbances, or do it in a way where they're away from the operations of the business and the demands so they can actually create time for themselves.
That's brilliant. Excellent. So that's the kind of the content we wanted to cover with you. So kind of the question is really what's next. So just a quick recap on what we've talked about. So first off, we talked about the importance of clarifying the future. So really getting leadership buy-in and sponsorship and understanding the strategic significance of what you're doing.
Second thing is make sure you define the capabilities. So define what's important for you guys within your organization. So, it could be a collection of the different things that we outline: competencies, capabilities, skills, styles, whatever it is.
Third up is identifying who you're going to be targeting with your leadership capability. Is it everyone? Is it your senior leaders, aspiring leaders, high potentials? So that's really important. And then, where are you going to have the biggest impact and how you're going to sequence that development?
Then optimize the ecosystem around the leader, set them up for success and stack the odds of probability that it will succeed because you've made the culture around them and the environment right for their transformation.
Step 5 is around designing your program and your approach. So do your research, make sure it's relevant, and really try to understand the psychological and practical barriers that are going to be in the way of engaging participants and work out how you can create transformative learning.
And then deliver pilots. So the days of us delivering an oven-ready, freshly baked leadership program that will stand the test of time are over. You don't know until you actually get your program out there what's going to work and what won't, what land, and you'll learn along the way. So iterate, run pilots, get feedback. Don't be afraid to amend it, but get it out there and get started.
And then our last step is evaluate. So it's evaluating the success and also kind of seeing the impact you're having. And that's really important to do some sort of formal evaluation. So you've got evidence there so you can learn and build the case for future investment in leadership capability. Okay, so we're just going to leave you with 2 questions now. You've heard us talk about leadership capability for the last hour. So we're really interested and we'd love to hear if you want to share with us afterwards. One insight you're going to take away and reflect on from what you've heard. So what stood out, what's made you think, oh, actually, I'm going to take that away and kind of think about that and kind of reflect. And then what's one action you're going to take to move you forward? So it doesn't have to be huge, but kind of what's the next step to better?
Yeah, and it's really important, isn't it? Also, we're giving you lots of really good information, but what really matters is what you do with this as well. So please take the time to do that.
Yeah.
And feel free to share your actions and insights in the comments below, whether you're watching this on YouTube or seeing this on LinkedIn as well. We'd love to hear what you're going to do as a result.
Absolutely. And then just that leadership impact guide with all those stats that we've talked about in today's session. If you want to get hold of that, just scan that QR code. Let's have your email address and it'll be in your inbox. Lovely. And then just wrap up, we're really happy for you to get in contact with us after this. We're both on LinkedIn and active on LinkedIn, or you can drop us an email directly using those email addresses on the screen. We'd very much like to hear from you.
Yeah, give us your feedback. Obviously, said this is an emerging field, and we'd love to hear your experiences as well. Whenever we've done this session, we've always got really great insights from people as well that we've then incorporated into the research too. So reach out to us, let us know, and also let us know how you get on with your capability program as well.
Fabulous. Thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.